We need to strengthen the profession. We should not have the profession as a place for dilettantes and amateurs. Teachers should have at least a full year of professional education and practice teaching. Principals should be master teachers themselves. If we're going to ask principals to evaluate their teachers, they have to be excellent teachers themselves. This notion that you can create a leadership institute and train someone who's never taught to be a principal is a ridiculous idea. And only in America would people be hiring superintendents who are themselves not educators. It's ridiculous. In the last 12 years in New York, we've had superintendents who were a lawyer, a publisher who lasted 90 days, and now a, I don't know, bureaucrat, not an educator. We should use tests diagnostically, by which I mean that the only valid use of a test is to understand how to help children learn better. It is not valid to use tests as carrots and sticks. It distorts their meaning and their purpose. Now, by diagnostic testing, the very best diagnostic testing is when the teacher teaches the lesson and gives a test made by the teacher. The teacher grades the test and finds out very quickly that Johnny or Jane or Maria or Paul doesn't understand this or that, and then is able to make sure that they get the help they need because the teacher knows what their needs are. Or the teacher discovers that something that she thought she taught, no one understood it. So she learns about herself, she didn't do a good job, and she learns it very quickly. But think about what happened in New York when we did the Common Core testing. The kids took the test in April, and the results came in August, and the kids didn't even have the same teacher anymore. And once the kids' test scores were released, no one was allowed to see what they got right and what they got wrong. So the test has no diagnostic value whatsoever. It's simply a way to rank and rate teachers and students in schools, and that's a misuse of testing. Now, I believe that schools that are struggling, and there are schools that are struggling, should get timely help and not closing. Maybe they need smaller classes for the children who can't read. Maybe they need a different principal. Maybe they need extra social workers. Maybe they need more bilingual instructors. It's up to the leadership to determine what their needs are. And if the school is closed, the leadership has failed. We have a particularly high failure rate in New York City where they have closed dozens, if not hundreds, of schools. And they're proud of it. And it's wrong. The purpose of education is not to race our children to ever higher test scores, but to prepare them for the duties and the responsibilities of citizenship. Massachusetts is where public education began. It's the home of Horace Mann. It's the home of so many major figures in public education. And they weren't thinking of test scores. They were thinking of how do we sustain this fragile democracy? What matters most is that we have schools where young people learn to think about the consequences of their actions. I don't know how to measure that, but it's really important. That's what adults do. We need schools where children learn to treat others with respect, where they learn how to live and work in a world of rapid change, where they gain the knowledge and the skills to make our society more just and more civil and to bring us to that day when there really is liberty and justice for all. Now, the two most important things that the citizen must do, is to choose our leaders. And we want our young people to be so well educated that they choose wisely, that they're not moved by emotional appeals, but that they're able to look beyond the emotional appeals and think about what's best for our society. The other most important responsibility for them as citizens is to sit on a jury where they will make a decision about the fate of their fellow citizens. You might be in the docket. And when you're in the docket, you want to be able to look over there and say, I educated them, and they're going to make a good decision. They're going to weigh the evidence, they're going to listen carefully, and they're going to think hard. And you want them to be well educated. And that's why we have schools, not about test scores, about wisdom. So, despite all these hoaxes, and despite our total detachment from reality at the moment, I'm actually optimistic about the future. I feel the tide is turning. This so-called reform movement is built on a mountain of error and hyperbole. Everything it has done has failed. These people, these guys for the most part, they are losers. Losers. They have no solutions. Nothing that they do has worked, and it's all detached from reality. They are involved in hoax after hoax, and some of them don't even realize that they're being hoaxed themselves. Some of them are investing energy thinking that they're going to make money, and they do. They're not being hoaxed. Some of them have been fooled into thinking that they're helping children when in fact they're hurting children and hurting our society. But they are on the losing side of history. Martin Luther King said, "The arc of justice bends slowly, but it bends towards justice." They will lose. They are not on the right side of history. I see it happening. I see it happening across the country. Parents are organizing to fight against high-stakes testing and to defend their community public schools. Students are organizing to fight against high-stakes testing and to protect their neighborhood school. Teachers are organizing because they want to defend their profession. The opt-out movement is growing across the country. Parents are saying, "Not with my child, you won't." In Florida, just this past fall, a voucher amendment was put up in a red state with the heavy support of Jeb Bush and the legislature and the current governor. It went down to overwhelming defeat. People don't want it. In Florida also, Jeb Bush and Michelle Reed tried to sell the idea of the parent trigger. The parent trigger means that you can round up the signatures of half the parents in a school and seize control of the school, fire the staff, and hand the school over to a charter operator. It's another of the hoaxes of our time. And the parents in Florida knew it was a hoax because they're overrun with for-profit charter corporations run by rappers and celebrities and all kinds of phonies. And the parent trigger folks couldn't find any PTA, any parent group in Florida to testify on their behalf. So they had to import parents from California who were paid to come and testify in Florida. And as a consequence, a legislature that was dominated by Republicans did not pass the parent trigger legislation. It failed. The good news was it not only failed once, it failed twice. And then there's a fellow in New York who started an organization called the Bats. Any bats here? There's one. A bat, there's two. Some people are ashamed to say that they're bats. I'm a bat. I'm an honorary bat. This was started by a man named Marc Nason, who is a professor of African American history at Fordham University. And his wife is a principal. She happens to be the principal of my grandson's elementary school. And the Bats are badass teachers. And they are sick and tired of being kicked around. They're sick and tired of big money pushing around school people. And there are 30,000 of them, and they act together. And what has made it possible for them to be successful is social media. And you know what, folks? We own social media because there are very few people who belong to this corporate reform movement, and they don't know how to tweet. We do. So we saw in Ohio the repeal of John Kasich's attempt to ban collective bargaining. It was rolled back by the voters. Just a few weeks ago, there was an election in Little Bridgeport, Connecticut, which some people said was the beginning of the end of the corporate reform movement, because the people there voted 2-1 to elect a group of insurgents who were opposed to the corporate reform Paul Vallis administration. And his days in Bridgeport are now numbered. In New York City, where I live, the candidate who was most opposed to Mayor Bloomberg's election program won the Democratic primary and is 40 points. He's 40 points ahead of his Republican opponent, so he will soon be mayor. And it's very exciting after 12 years of Michael Bloomberg. We will not have a multi-billionaire as our mayor. We will have a board of education that has to listen to people and will not be able to close their schools unless they want their schools closed. And nobody, for some strange reason, people don't want their schools closed. Only mayors and businessmen want to close other people's schools. The teachers in Seattle at Garfield High School, they said last spring to the superintendent, we will not give this test. This test is unnecessary. It's a waste of time. It's a waste for the kids. We will not give this test. And the superintendent said, I can fire you. And they said, all of us together are telling you, we will not give this test. And the superintendent said, I will dock you 10% of your income. And they said, we will not give this test. And the superintendent backed down and nothing happened and they did not give the test. In Rhode Island, the high school students have organized as the Providence Student Union. These are fantastic kids, and they are angry because the state of Rhode Island is using a standardized test as a graduation requirement, and the kids say, this is wrong. Many of our fellow students will not graduate. Their lives will be destroyed by a standardized test. This is wrong, and they have fought it, and they have been brilliant because they haven't created petitions on change.org like us adults do, which no one listens to. They have done political theater, and they've been totally brilliant. Their first action was that they had a zombie march in front of the Rhode Island Department of Education. And that got my attention, so I immediately sent them a contribution. And then the next thing that they did was they gathered enough items released items from the New England Comprehensive Assessment Test. It has the horrible name of kneecap, and they didn't want to be kneecapped. So they gathered enough released items, and they found 60 accomplished professionals who were willing to take the test on a Saturday morning. They had lawyers, they had architects, they had legislators, they had journalists, and these folks took the test that they will made up of graduation items, and 60% of them failed the test. When the state commissioner gave her State of the State address, the students scheduled the very first annual State of the Student address an hour before the state superintendent's address. These kids are relentless, they are brilliant, they cannot be stopped. When I was in Providence last week, the next day I wrote an article in the Huffington Post called, These Kids Today, Are They Our Greatest Generation? I got so much hate mail, it was really funny. People don't want to believe in our children. They do not want to believe in them. They don't want to believe in our teachers. They don't want to believe in our children, and they're wrong. It's as though they don't believe in America. These are our children, and they're terrific. They are going to turn this country around. And then there's the story, which I love, and this is just from a few days ago, of a little school in Washington Heights, New York, called Castlebridge. And they said, we will not give the test to the children who are in kindergarten, first grade, and second grade. They're too little. And 80 of the 90-some, more than 80% of their parents said, you cannot test my child, and the test was canceled. So I think the spring of 2014 will be the biggest opt-out of testing season in our history. If they do not have the data, they cannot rate the teachers, they cannot close your school, and we can stop the machine. And that's why I'm going to do everything in my power to encourage people, do not give the test, do not take the test, opt out. And so I know you're all eager to go home and to catch what's happening in the World Series. And this is my last words. My last words are the last paragraph of my book. Despite its faults, the American system of democratically controlled schools has been the mainstay of our communities and the foundation for our nation's success. We must work together to improve our public schools. We must extend the promise of equal educational opportunity to all the children of our nation. Protecting our public schools against privatization and saving them for future generations of American children is the civil rights issue of our time. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
We're going to have a short Q&A session.
Okay, very short Q&A because I know I've kept you way too long, but there's so much that I want to tell you. And thank you so much, and thank you to the Citizens for Public Schools.
All right, so for those who'd like to ask questions, I'll ask you to line up here, please. And while we're doing that, I'd like to recognize some other folks that are here. Senator Pat Jalen is here. Other legislators that we haven't recognized yet? No? Okay. So for those of you who are lining up for your questions, we'll ask you to keep it in your question or your comment to 1 minute max.
What do you think happened to President Obama? What do you think happened to President Obama, and how do we get him back on track?
The question is, what happened to President Obama? And how do we get him back on track? President Obama, when he was running for office, had as his spokesperson Linda Darling-Hammond, who would have been a wonderful Secretary of Education. But he decided that when he was running for office that he needed the money from the very wealthy, and they wanted Arne Duncan. And so that's why we have Arne Duncan and not Linda Darling-Hammond, and we will never get him back. We have to wait for the next president and create a grassroots movement so powerful that the next person running for president will want to lead the parade that we create.
You have a room full of people here tonight who agree with you. You talk about things that are happening across the country. We are having a mayoral election in Boston. The two people after the primary both want to lift the cap. You talk about statistics, you talk about data in your book that shows the unwisdom, I should say, of increasing the cap. What do we as citizens do to educate our potential leaders?
Well, the question is, what do you do about the lifting of the cap? You have two candidates who both want to lift the cap. They're both wrong. So what do you do? You have to go to your legislators and say, if you're going to lift the cap, we insist that the charter schools live by the same rules as public schools. They must not exclude children with disabilities. They must not exclude English language learners. And if the Boston Public Schools are 20% English learners, so should the charter schools be.
Hi, my name is Will, and I'm a recent graduate of the Boston Public Schools. Thank you so much for speaking here today. My question is about what we talked about in terms of the purpose of testing and the dangers of testing, and I'm trying to sort of figure out how I feel about these issues. I just want to tell a very quick personal story. I went to a public school in Boston that didn't have any testing, and when I left that school and went to a different school, I found that there were certain things I didn't know. I didn't know a fair amount of math, and so I'm trying to figure out, is there a middle ground in terms of using testing for diagnostics but not for everything? I'm just wondering what your thoughts on that.
Well, I think the only valid use of tests is diagnostic purposes. And if you're you have to understand, private schools don't use standardized tests at all. So they must be doing something right. The whole country of Finland has no standardized testing at all. So the question comes down to, are you talking about standardized test, or are you talking about testing, period? I'm not opposed to testing, period. I'm opposed to the misuse of standardized testing. I could go give you a whole other lecture on how standardized testing has so many errors in it. If you read a book called Making the Grades, you'll read about some guy who spent 15 years in the testing industry and what a fraud it is. And you would not want your life depending on somebody who is grading your test, looking at 30 or 40 test answers a minute, or every couple of minutes. So I think the question is what kind of test, and that's why I believe that tests should be made by teachers and kids should be tested, but standardized testing should be done on a sampling basis primarily, not for individual children. Just being able to pick the right bubble is a skill you will never use again in your life.
Thank you again for coming. And my question is about a specific test, the AP in the College Board. Having worked in two now urban public school districts and seeing how the AP exam is really advertised to these students and to these students' parents as a way to get ready for college, as a way to I've seen vice principals tell parents that if students take enough AP exams, they'll be able to skip an entire year of college, when most colleges limit the number of AP credits they'll even take. So I was just wondering what we can do to try to both push our students to go to these higher levels of thinking without pushing them into classes that either they'll fail the exam and get no credit whatsoever, or that don't actually teach them at a college level.
There have been now several articles written about the overselling of AP. And I'm persuaded that there are many young people who are pushed into AP courses who are not going to pass the AP course, but it's going to be a tremendous boon for the College Board. The AP is one of the biggest money makers for the College Board. I think that kids can do high-level thinking whether they do or they don't take an AP course. You do not have to teach AP in order to have high-level thinking. That's up to the teacher. Yes, sir.
My name is Haley Yarden. I live in Cambridge, the most progressive city in Massachusetts, which is the most progressive state in the Union. And what I see here is an increase in top-down decision-making, so that everything is ordered from above. And if a school, even a wealthy school district like Cambridge, wants state money and federal money, they toe the line. What do I do about it?
Well, I'd say that if you think about the top-down mandates in education, they cost the state of Massachusetts far more than the federal government gave you. You bought a pig in a poke with Race to the Top. Every place that took Race to the Top money ended up spending more than they got. So the best thing to do is to say, I just don't want to do this. I'm not going to do it. No. The power of no is very important.
my 2-year-old, my second grade grandchild informed me that the teacher does what she's told.
Well, that's wrong. That's wrong. I mean, we're all being treated as if we're cards in an old-fashioned IBM machine. And there comes a time, as Mario Savio said, where you have to stop the machine, throw your body on it, throw your body on the levers, and say, I won't do this. No. Thank you.
I just wanted to say that in terms of the mayoral election that's coming up very soon, that I think that there is really a big difference between the two candidates. And although I think one of them is very committed to charter schools and organization of the BPS school system, and I think the other candidates kind of look long, knows that his job really is to be the mayor for the Boston public school system. And so I just don't want people to leave here thinking that, oh, we have the two candidates in Boston and they're equal and they're equally wrong. I think it's really important to do your homework and to look to see who is really supporting the corporatization of the Boston public school system.
Right. No, I understand that. Even though I may be a New Yorker, I'm well aware that Stand for Children and DEFR, which is the hedge fund manager group, wanted to pour hundreds of thousands of dollars into Mr. Connolly's campaign. I would never vote for him.
Thank you so much for coming to us. I'm reading your first book. I haven't gotten through it quite yet. I too am a recent graduate of the Boston Public Schools, and my question has to do with how one speaks to the average person about these issues, people who aren't informed or aren't aware of the two forces vying for a public education system. I'm speaking from a place of experience where even my progressive friends and their parents can't quite believe that there are corporations who actually want to take over our schools. So how does one talk about these issues in a way that's simple and convinces people?
Well, what you need to talk about is the privatization of almost everything, and that it's not good for society. We have seen the privatization of hospitals, the privatization of prisons, the privatization in some cases of libraries, the privatization of water. I mean, it goes on and on and on. There's no stopping greed. It's a very powerful force, and we must maintain our public sector. We must maintain the commons.
I actually don't have a question. I just want to thank you for exposing the horrors of virtual education in K-12. I'm a school committee member, vice chair of my school committee in Greenfield, where we ushered in this whole horrific idea of virtual education and how it's better for kids, how it's innovative, how it will give us money in the school district. We'll bring in money, innovation. It will change the lives of disabled kids, and what it's actually doing is it's a continuation of oppression of disabled kids and underprivileged kids and socioeconomically deprived kids and families. And I applaud you for helping me. I feel like I've been a lone wolf for 6 years. I'm digging my heels in and saying no, no, no. So thank you.
Well, you will see that in chapter 17 I write about Greenfield and how Greenfield ushered in the K-12 hoax. So for a little bit of money, it's amazing how little people sell out for.
I wanted to first thank you for coming, and as you may know, a group of us here in Boston, made up of teachers, parents, and students, one of whom, Carlos, just spoke to you, put together the Boston Truth Coalition. And I want to say that it's made up of badass teachers, badass parents, and badass students. And I'm hoping that you'll come back when we get our revolution off the ground and stage a coup of our Boston, taking back our Boston.
Wonderful. Congratulations.
I want to appreciate the fact that you're enlightening so many people about this issue. As educators, we struggle with this every day. But I think the public has to understand that this is about money. This is about power, money, influence, It's about breaking the promise of a strong public education that's available to everyone. It's about tearing up Social Security so that people don't rely, so that that safety net somehow is exposed. It's the privatization of everything for the betterment of money. If I watch Wall Street Week and I hear something, the dean from Columbia University talking about startups and entrepreneurialism are where the kids for MBAs want to be. They don't work for a corporation, they want to become millionaires quicker. They see everything we have as that safety net as a target to dissolve, to make profits as best they can. Education Week last week had a headline that said, the story of two startups, what they were is in the education marketplace. The education marketplace was two computer firms trying to do online education. We need to build allies out there. And if you may go to a retiree or a Social Security recipient that may look at a teacher and say, gee, you raised my taxes. But when you explain to them that there's a direct correlation by the same people, ALEC and the other groups out there, that are trying to dissolve or take apart their Social Security to break that promise of solid Medicare, higher education at an affordable price, and a strong public education for everyone, we can start building allies to start the troops, involve the greater public to support a position that supports the continuation of strong public school. It's embarrassing that we're the best performing state in the country and we're still under attack. We have nothing to be embarrassed about except our lack of performance on this issue. Thank you very much.
You're right.
Okay, we're going to have one more speaker, one more question, and then we have a request for you, so please wait until you hear the request. Okay.
My question has to do with charter schools, and it seems to me that I'm wondering whether you differentiate between for-profit charter schools and for non-profit ones.
Yes and no. I mean, I'm totally opposed to for-profit charters, but there are a lot of nonprofit charters that engage in the very practices that I decry, where children are treated with this no excuses boot camp style, which is not innovative at all. It's just going back to the worst successes of the 19th century. And when some of these nonprofit charters pay their executives $300,000, $400,000, and yet they're called nonprofit. So what I'm in favor of is what I described. Charters willing to collaborate, charters willing to share their secrets, charters who will not see themselves as competitors to public education, because that will create a dual school system. Thank you.
So thank you for coming this evening. Another round of applause for Diane.
Thank you.
Some of us are here at Citizens for Public Schools. We hope that if you're not already a member, you will join us. We need your number. We need to grow our organization. We need to organize. We need to have Diane come back again next year and to bring other speakers in. And we need to continue to come together because it's pretty lonely. So out the back of your program, there's a form here. If you want to fill it out and say yes, you'd like to become a member, just leave it with any of the volunteers in the back. And also, if you want to do something tonight to help end poverty, we hope, if you haven't already signed the petition, that the folks out there from Raise Up Massachusetts are out there. They're looking for folks to sign the petition and also to become volunteers to help raise the minimum wage in Massachusetts, as Diane mentioned earlier, as well as to introduce the notion that folks will get a minimum of 5 days of sick days, 5 sick days per year. So thank you for coming, everybody, and we hope to see you at our next event in December.